so many systems are broken. If you as a community don't sort that out yourselves, it ain't gonna happen.
We want decentralized, biodiverse, culturally diverse, economically diverse, flourishing society.
This movement is about creating a more beautiful reality for everyone.
To be truly ecological, the economy has to be localized.
Humanity is at a crossroads. The choice is stark. Either we continue to deny reality and face inevitable ecological and social collapse, or we join the countless numbers of people on every continent who are forging a very different path. For thousands of years, our cultures were finely tuned to the infinite diversity of the natural world. The way we lived our lives and the stories we told reflected our deep spiritual connections with life around us. Our skills were born of an evolving dialogue with the sun and moon, with water, plants, and animals. Human life in sustainable balance with the rest of creation. But in recent times, we have lost our way. A man-made consumer monoculture has ruptured our sacred connections with Mother Earth, fooling us into believing that we can create something better than life itself. A toxic combination of speed, distance, and scale has made care and accountability obsolete, giving rise to a de facto corporate empire that now threatens the well-being of virtually everyone on the planet.
These days, we just hear about more and more crises in the news, and we're all running faster and faster just to keep a roof over our head. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed and hopeless. There's actually a huge cultural turning going on that is so positive, but we don't get to hear about it. When we step back to look at our economic system, it becomes clear that it's the main cause of increasing poverty worldwide, increasing pollution, increasing breakdown of every kind, polarization, anger, violence, and even war. And we need to look at the fact that from the outset, the modern economy was actually created by global traders. And they started extracting wealth by driving people away from the land and away from producing things for their own needs to producing for the traders.
We're at a remarkable time in history right now. There's no question about it. We're standing on the precipice. And the precipice is one that's caused by people like me when I was an economist. I was chief economist, but really as an economic hitman. And my job was to convince countries with resources our corporations coveted to basically turn those resources over to us. And we did this through debt, we did this through loans, we did this through building infrastructure.
The World Bank and the IMF were set up near the end of World War II to rebuild the economies of Europe. Later they began offering loans to poor countries, but only if they privatized their economies and allowed Western corporations free access to their raw materials and markets.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference.
Since the Second World War, the grip of the global financial institutions has only intensified. In the name of free trade, governments on both left and right have handed over more and more wealth and power to multinational banks and corporations. They have promoted the concept of a free and fair market, while actually using taxes, subsidies, and regulations to favor global monopolies. in the process destroying the rich fabric of smaller, place-based economies all around the world.
We were a kind of champion of Westernization, Americanization, and globalization. What we are experiencing now is not just an ecological disaster, but it's a cultural disaster. Life is becoming harder and harder. The gap between the rich and poor, widening. And poverty is really increasing rapidly.
One of the big lies about why growth is necessary is that people will tell you that you need growth for poverty alleviation. The way that growth operates, it's operated in tandem with a real negative redistribution of wealth and income. So the benefits of growth, the wealth from growth, has been captured by an ever smaller minority of people, and ever larger amounts of the population are having to live with the damaging consequences of growth.
If you and I have our car stolen, we have to buy a new car, it's good for GDP. If the water is so polluted, we have to buy it in bottles, great for GDP. If we get cancer, great for GDP. If we plant a garden and eat healthy food and stay healthy, that's bad for GDP.
End goal of human life has become economic growth. And economic growth means more production, more consumption. So nature has become a resource for the economy.
The path of limitless power and profits began with colonialism. And today, there's only one future on that path. That future is extinction. That future is collapse of the Earth system, collapse of societies, collapse of relationships.
A huge problem are our free trade agreements. So let's say it costs $10 to produce a bushel of corn in the United States, and the small farmer in Guatemala can do it for $5. But so the small farmer has to sell it for $6 to make any profit, and the American corporation is making it for $10, but getting a subsidy of $6, so they can sell it for $5 and still make $1 profit in Guatemala. And so the Guatemalan farmer can't compete, even though he's producing it much cheaper, because the United States has subsidies which are allowed under these free trade agreements. Tariffs are not allowed. So Guatemala can't impose tariffs, and they're not a wealthy enough country to subsidize their farmers. So the poor farmer, the campesino, the small farmer, goes out of business. And what does he do? He has a couple of choices. He can go to work for a big American sweatshop, or migrate to the United States. And it's not just the small farmer. If the small farmer goes out of business, the local markets go out of business, the local shops go out of business, everything that supports the farmer and everything that he sells to, it's a spiraling thing.
Spain is the main producer of oranges in the world. And last year, in Spain, we consume more oranges coming from South Africa. Spanish oranges are coming to the UK, are going to Germany, are going to Norway, and South African oranges are coming to Spain. This is not a consequence of any natural law. This is a consequence of all the international global policies, trade agreements. It's a nonsense, because if we try to stop climate change, if we try to get equality, this is something that shouldn't happen.
Today, the ingredients in an average meal travel 1,500 miles from farm to plate. In fact, nearly everything we consume traverses the world. a vast network of ever larger ports, airports, and superhighways shuttle identical products back and forth, all courtesy of so-called free trade agreements. Agreements such as NAFTA and GATT gave rise to the dangerously volatile mix of a deregulated global financial market and digital technology.
All the international maritime and air transportation, the emissions from this are not accounted by any country. Just think of all those vessels with all kinds of commodities from China to everywhere, from mining, with soy, with oil, with liquefied gas. Those emissions are nobody's emission, because one of the key assumptions of the climate policy is that you cannot harm trade.
Governments are handcuffed, but they actually handcuff themselves by signing these treaties, as they said, that allows corporations to sue a government if the government passes a law that could, not even does, but could reduce profits. Worst of all, what court does it go to? It's a corporate court, right? It's not just a regular court of law. So the idea that you are, as a government, whose obligation should be to protect the health and the environment of your country and your people, are signing away your right to do so. Surely this can't be the case.
What happens with global trade is that often that best agricultural resource is being used to produce luxury commodity crops to feed other spaces. And those export crops often take away the resources from local communities that they need to be able to feed their own populations. It's a myth that countries across the global south need to have export markets in order to have economic development in their countries. What would be a better economic development model is to try and think about food sovereignty, and that the best agricultural resource in countries is there for countries to be able to produce food for themselves, and helping enable access to the land for small-scale farmers to be able to feed their local communities and to support their domestic food economies.
And in Africa, we have stood up with our 2 feet to defend our food systems, which we believe is right now is under threat by the green revolution in Africa, which is being driven by the corporates, which actually do not feed the majority of us. We are actually moving around in all the 54 countries in Africa with My Food is African campaign. My Food is African campaign is a campaign which is emphasizing that we need to eat food that is African, that is homegrown.
Globalization ruined diversity in our food and ruined diversity of our culture, ruined diversity of thinking. It ruined everything. So now people, the whole country, think the same way and do the same thing. That means work hard to make money. Don't care about themselves. Don't care about nature. Don't care about family. Don't care about anything. Money is number one.
Because of the concentration of power and wealth in global corporations, essentially, virtually every avenue of knowledge has been colonized. So that's from schools to universities, it's of course in the media, and it's even in mainstream science. So what we're seeing there is a narrative that ultimately supports profit for the few, not humanity or life itself. This colonization of the mind, this mind pollution, has taken many forms. Among other things, it still promotes this romanticized idea of an amazing, successful, happy consumer culture in the West. And it's being pushed on rural people around the world to make them feel backward and stupid.
Right, I'd climbed all the towers that were promised to be highways to heaven, and they didn't lead to anywhere promising. And it was from those heights I started to notice the losses I had experienced, but couldn't even name at that point. See, to be educated where I come from is to be educated out of context. It's to be teased away from contextuality. It's to be decontextualized. So there was hardly any awareness of my language, my stories, the stories of my people.
There's a saying, the white teacher who brought the pencil also brought the eraser. And so what's being erased? So we're told, as I said, our grandparents don't exist anymore. We're told that our territories, our lands don't matter. We're told that our hands and our bodies don't matter. We're told that our ancestors don't matter. The dominant education system is designed to destroy our connection to self and to place and to community.
Education has just created me as a part of the system, like an agent for the system, and hasn't taught me social innovation and how to change the system and make the system better, or it just shows you how to maintain something that creates privilege for few. I think we are waking up when we start working and we see that our work is not making any difference in the world. Like if I was working in marketing and creating advertisements for big companies, and I was like, why am I doing that? Why am I using my life to make more money for people who are already billionaires?
We are dehumanized, basically, without knowing it, without seeing it, because it is the way we grow up.
On the surface, everything is fine. It's well controlled by education system, media, and people still buy this, notion or illusion that everything's working all right.
As the cost of living increases, our interactions have become increasingly brief and transactional, and we're encouraged to seek belonging through consumerism, stuffing a void in ourselves instead of addressing our spiritual need for connection to others and to nature. Meanwhile, the world of social media is becoming our new reality, an anonymous place of ruthless competition, division, and alienation.
We're being pitched one against another artificially, partly by the system of capitalism, which is all about competition, and partly by social media, which thrives on polarization. But there is a massive increase in mental illness. Very few people feel grounded and happy with their lives now. And this is not surprising, because there are three things that give meaning and fulfillment to human life, above all. One is belonging to a stable, secure community in which you feel you belong, where you know you can trust, where you share values, where you can open your doors to people and share your lives with them. The second is the relationship with the natural world. And I think the third one is the relationship with the divine.
We're going through this spiritual crisis. Our children are harming themselves, or isolating themselves. They kill themselves,
In my world, this pandemic of depression and increasing suicide rates among young people globally is almost like an expected outcome of the global economy and the fragmentation that we're experiencing within psychiatry and within mental health. There's been almost like an effort to isolate this problem from the meta-crisis and almost kind of put the blame back on the individual and say, what's wrong with you? And then how can we fix you?
We are told that our struggles are solely our own, that we are individually responsible not only for our own problems, but also for the problems of the world. But the reality is that the multiple crises we face are systemic, climate change, the breakdown of democracy, our own depression and anxiety can all be traced back to the same root cause: an economy almost wholly divorced from the living world.
Localization is about moving in exactly the opposite direction of the globalizing path. It's a process of rebuilding the systems of human interdependence and community, and our interdependence with the living world on which we depend. It's about creating more accountable, more visible systems so that we're not trapped in a world where we can't even see the impact we have on other people or on the natural world. It's a coming home to the way that we evolved. For most of our time on this planet, that's how we lived. And it meant that young and old were deeply connected, were supporting each other through their entire life. It meant that we knew that we belonged, we knew who we were, because our identities were shaped by those relationships.
In the absolute heart of darkness of this crisis of meaning that defines our civilization, there is a different path that is starting to emerge. And that's why I think that even though consumerism seems to have us in such a tight grip, actually that grip may be a lot more fragile than it seems.
What if we could turn to our neighborhoods? What if we could have and develop and cultivate intelligences that are immediate and intimate? What if we didn't have to depend on Coca-Cola or some other giant corporate formation in order to have bread or to have drink or to make merry or to meet ourselves for the first time?
There is this deep yearning, the deep longing for connection to community, to come out of our isolated homes into a place where we feel like we belong.
If we go further back into understanding how to be in the flow of the cycles of time, the natural cycles of nature, then we may have true progress as opposed to this artificial progress, which is progress towards destruction.
If enough of us actually feel into these values we're talking about of deep connectedness, and in addition to really orienting our own lives towards doing what we know is needed, like locally and together and in our communities, also making bridges, looking at what others are doing around us and amplifying the work of others. So as a coherent, cohesive global network of change, we might develop enough power to make that transformation happen in time.
Well, what is localization really about? It's about increasing the density and the complexity and the richness of local connections, with people and places and beings, plants, animals, water, air, like all of the things that create a place.
We all need to be rooted in a place. So our economy has to be rooted in a place. Our politics has to be rooted in a place.
If we are changing the systems of our basic needs, meaning that if we change the way we produce and consume and distribute things like our food, but also energy, also transport, doing that, we can develop pathways towards much more healthier and fair communities and through that society.
If we want to create a better future, we need to first remember our past. We are not a cancer on the planet. We have the potential to be a regenerative keystone species, as was said. And the truth is, none of us would be here if, for the long arch of our journey as a species, we had not been gardeners and careful tenders of the ecosystems and the bioregions that brought us forth.
La relocalización es el camino en el cual nos tenemos que dirigir todos a nivel mundial, que eso es lo que está pasando. Es la respuesta a la crisis de un sistema político, económico que no funciona. La relocalización es una respuesta que se está dando en todo el mundo, en muchas regiones campesinas, indígenas, urbanas, en muchos lugares.
Localization isn't about withdrawing from the world or only being concerned about our own needs. On the contrary, it's about genuine democracy, prosperity and well-being for the entire global population.
We actually can't have localization if global power structures are invested in a corporate state nexus that's sole job is to undermine our livelihoods, our life force, our well-being. And so we have to organize to change global polity, global superstructures, and we have to live the lives that matter to us in ways that are in symbiosis with the living world in a place-based way.
We need welcoming communities. We need responsive relationships and mentors throughout our lives. And we need play, nature, immersion, and connection, and healing practices to get us back in balance with one another, with ourselves, with nature. And so it is a restructuring issue, and I think it fits very well with localization.
Once people wake up to the fact that in the name of growth, we're all poorer, we're going to have a very powerful movement that will insist that we no longer measure progress through GDP, that will insist that we now start regulating and taxing the global corporations. We also need to be demanding a decentralization in terms of economic power from the nation state to the region and to the local level. That decentralization would mean the ability to tax and subsidize at the local level. The ability, the ease to also support and invest in your local businesses and communities. If we don't have economic power, we don't have political power. So we really want to encourage the decentralization of the economy as a priority. And with that comes the decentralization of real political power.
We've demonstrated that we can change not just economic policy, but the layout of our towns and cities, that we can revalue the kind of work that people do and shift economic purpose, change what companies are producing almost overnight when the will is there.
There's so many things we can do, but one thing is nurture local businesses and get all of the additional benefits of local business, which include more income, more wealth, more jobs, better environmental protection, better civic participation, more public health from better food.
Wherever you go, it can be in a small city, little town, village, big neighborhood, everywhere you can find alternatives happening. Or it can be something small, it can be something bigger, but there's always people trying to transform the place where they live. For me, that's something powerful. That's something that often when you are in your own little project, you feel lonely, you feel alone. And I think it's very important to understand that we are many.
There is so much happening. Everywhere you go, there is so much happening. You never read those stories in the papers, you never see them on TV, but they're all out there. We need to start modeling the changes that we need to see at the community scale, at the local level. We need to be looking at local economies as the foundation for this, making those economies more diverse, more resilient, and increasing community ownership and democracy.
We should feel so blessed to be alive at this time because we have a tremendous opportunity to really change things, to do something that's never been done in history. There have been a lot of empires that have collapsed. All of them have collapsed, and this one's collapsing, but we have an opportunity to turn not this empire, but to turn our vision of the world that creates empires at all into a very different vision.
We have to now commit ourselves, no matter who we are, across our diversities, across the world, to another future.
People say, well, what can I do? I feel so helpless. Here am I, this small person, and there's this vast earth, and then there's an infinitely vaster cosmos, which means that none of this means anything. In fact, if you see with a different eye, you see not only that it does very much mean something and that we're connected to it, but also that our role is not so insignificant.
We still have a lot of wealth, real wealth, is still existing in us. And I think that's what the localization movement is trying to remind us of, is we're not poor, backwards, stupid, alone like the dominant system would like us to think we are. We still have a lot of power.
We humans need to be mirrored, and we need to have other people who live by example, who can provide this experience. And that's why this localization movement is so extremely important at this time point, especially to provide, living examples of places and ways of being that will make our deep memory kind of, whoa, I remember now who I am.
We're trying to listen and hear, differently, and hear into the corners that we've not been able to, in order to figure out, ways of creating a future that is repaired from the destructions of modernity.
We can all do something in our own way to create more local power, more local economy, and have fun doing it.
I think we're going to see some quite big economic alignments, realignments. I think we're going to see a lot of re-energized local political networks and political action. And we're particularly seeing that with local assemblies and, people who would never have considered activism suddenly getting involved across the UK in this country's experience anyway.
The idea that the world is still yet to come, that colonization hasn't stabilized or frozen everything into stable categories, that the world is open and emergent and poetic and promiscuous. That is the most hopeful thing.
Through community initiatives and deeper dialogue globally, a movement is emerging that has the potential to shape the future we want. One in which business and technology serve the needs of the many, rather than the profits of the few. Join us in this worldwide movement. Together we can turn the tide away from the destruction of ourselves and the planet and return home to Earth, to a local future.